Viki Holmes, at least my pen name is Viki Holmes. I'm since married, so Holmes is for writing. And I've been living in Hong Kong for 11 years. Before that I lived in the UK, in Cornwall and in Wales, which is where I studied English literature. And it's where I began writing poetry seriously. So I've been writing seriously for probably about 15, 16 years. And this is my first collection, Miss Moon's Class. So this was published in Hong Kong in 2008 with Chameleon Press. I've been published in a variety of other anthologies and magazines in America and Australia and Canada and various locations in Asia and the UK. So I've been published in all sorts of places. This is my main book that's been published at the moment. I've also edited poetry with my friend and fellow poet Kate Rogers. We co-edited the women's writing anthology Not Amused. That was published in Hong Kong in 2009 and featured writers from 20 different countries, I think, something like that. Many different countries, over 100 writers, including Margaret Atwood, Sharon Olds, Erica Jong, and a variety of other lesser known but no less interesting women poets. So yes, perhaps I'll tell you a little bit about how I started writing, and then I'll talk a bit about the writing that I've done in Hong Kong, and then we'll move on to the collection, Miss Moon's Class, and please do feel free to ask any questions along the way.
As difficult as possible.
It's absolutely difficult questions are welcome, though I can't guarantee sensible answers. So yes, I started writing in Cardiff at university with my flatmate and some of her friends. We formed a performance poetry collective called Happy Demon, and there were 5 of us. Our tagline was making the sad demons happy demons, and we began our career in Cardiff with a performance at Cardiff Central Library called Kissing for Fun and Profit. That was a lot of fun, and it was great to be reading in a library. I love books, I love literature. I'm actually working as a librarian and studying to be a librarian at the moment, which is very complementary to being a writer, at least once the studying's over and there's enough time left to look at writing again. So I started in Cardiff with the Happy Demons. I didn't think that I'd be a poet when I started out writing. I wrote more prose and dramatic monologues, and then I went to my very first poetry event in a pool club in one of the dodgier areas of Cardiff, and I read a dramatic monologue, and during the course of the reading, then titles are very important, so it moved from being a dramatic monologue very swiftly to being a prose poem, and so therefore I could legitimately perform at poetry events. So as we were performing in the collective once every 3 weeks, I had to write poetry to fuel the performance so that I had something to say. So that's what really got me started. And I've always been very enamoured of the spoken word. For me, poetry is very much something to be spoken aloud. So I usually write with that in mind. As the years have gone by, then I've also become more confident in and more interested in the way that poetry appears on the page. A lot of the poetry in Miss Moon's Class is still quite experimental in that I was eschewing capitals and punctuation in some of the pieces. There's some concrete poems. Shape is important. As time has gone on, then I've become more interested in formed poetry, in rhyme and structure, which I think is perhaps part and parcel of the evolution of a poet. So yes, so that's how I started out in Cardiff. I had my first publications there in an anthology of Welsh writing called The Pterodactyl's Wing, and later Seren Selections. I moved to Hong Kong after coming over here for 10 days. So many of people who live in Hong Kong stories begin, I came to Hong Kong for 10 days or 2 weeks or a month, and then end with, and that was 26 years ago. Well, I haven't quite made 26 years yet, but I did come to Hong Kong for 10 days and was in love with it enough that I wanted to come back, and did come back within a year, and have been there since. Hong Kong's a wonderful place for writing, in that there's a very, very supportive and welcoming writing community. When I first came to Hong Kong, then Out Loud was, I suppose, the main poetry event. For those of you who haven't been, Out Loud is a monthly poetry event at Hong Kong Fringe Club, where it's been, I think since 2004, 2005. It's definitely been over 10 years, and it's quite incredible. Back in the UK, then poetry events don't tend to be that long-lived. Usually about a year or a couple of years is the average lifespan for a poetry event where I've been. Out Loud continues to this day, and has also spawned a sister poetry community, if you like, the Peel Street Poets, who meet once a week. So there's really lots and lots of opportunities in Hong Kong to share your work and to thrive and to build on that. So Out Loud has spawned 2 poetry anthologies. Ray and Adam also feature in Out Loud 2, which is the second of the poetry anthologies. Indeed, as Ray and I were talking, then it's also how we got our cats. So poetry brings people and felines together. I'm perhaps going to pause for a moment and go back to my early childhood while talking about Miss Moon's class. So Miss Moon's class, the title of this really has a dual function. It has a very literal meaning and then a more more of an analogy. It's more that's it. I'm having trouble saying that, so I'm going to stop trying. Miss Moon was the name of my very first primary school teacher, my infant school teacher, in fact. She was a wonderful woman, and the title poem of the collection is actually based on a news item I read and wrote in my first news book when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And there's not much has changed, actually. That poem is quite literally what was in my news book, with a little bit of reflection. It also has a more, let's go for more metaphoric meaning, in that, of course, women are ruled by the moon, and so the collection Miss Moon's class is really about if all women are students in Miss Moon's class, if you like. This collection is really sort of the document of a journey, a process of growing up, of moving from childhood to womanhood, from Cornwall to Hong Kong, and various places in between, and a poetic journey as well. So I'm just going to quickly read Miss Moon's class. I haven't printed this one out because it's very little, but I'll just read that. So this is Miss Moon's class. My news book says, yesterday I cut myself on a blade of grass. I drew a whole field at the top of the page. 1,000 green sticks, blood on my finger, and a big smile. My head's only just higher than the grass, but my smile's bigger than Babylon. So that was my first news book at school, and if you like, the first step on the journey. I might also draw your attention to the painting on the back. An artist friend of mine, Guxik Lau, very talented Hong Kong artist, painted this picture as a response to the collection. The painting is also called Miss Moon's Class, and you can see the moon's reflection in the water there. So in this collection there are poems about Hong Kong. When I first moved here, then it was a real source of inspiration. It was so very different, and one of the things I've been fascinated, certainly in my early writing, with is this idea of the other and the different and the longed for other. There's an awful lot of love poetry in this collection. But love takes many forms. There are very many references to literature and to mythology, which provide the background. One of the stories that has really been significant for me in my writing and in life generally is Tam Lin. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Tam Lin is a ballad, and Tam Lin is a fairy knight who is captured by the Queen of Fairyland and is renowned for staying in the greenwood and getting young maidens into all kinds of trouble, but always goes home to the Queen of the Fairies and rides with her, until he meets Janet. Janet is a brave and strong-willed young woman who meets Tam Lin. Unlike the women who are surprised by him, she deliberately goes to where he is known to be, ties her kirtle above the knee, very bold move, and meets Tam Lin, falls in love with him, gets with child, and then goes back to her father's court, the king's court. And when quizzed as to who is the father of her child, she says no human knight shall be named as the father of this child. And she rescues Tam Lin. She does so. Tam Lin explains to her that he has to ride with the Queen of Fairyland for 7 years, and at the end of that time then he will be sacrificed and he will go to hell. The only way that this can stop is if maiden, in some versions I think it is actually a pregnant maiden, pulls him off the horse as he's riding, wraps him in her cloak and holds him fast no matter what he changes into. He might change into a snake, a burning coal, a lion, but she has to hold fast until finally he changes back into his own form, and then he will be free of the thrall of the Queen of Fairyland. So this is a story that I've always loved. It's a beautiful ballad, a beautiful song, and there's one poem in here about Tam Lin, which I thought I'd share with you, and then I'm also going to share with you a poem I wrote about Tam Lin more recently, and then we might talk a little bit about the evolution of my work since then. I have Gillian asked to print it out, so if you would like to follow. This is my first Tam Lin poem. It's called Catch. As you can see, it doesn't look like a traditional poem. This was an early poem that I wrote. It's a prose poem. It's very much stream of consciousness. Yes, there are reviews on the back. So, this is Catch. As the dream approaches, it changes in timbre slightly. You must lure it like a unicorn, but this can be done only when the intention is pure. Sometimes it is a silver birch and its bark peels back like the ripped petticoats of the shabby genteel. Darn it, what will it reveal? By its nature, it slips through its hands like Tam Lin or sand. He wonders whether she'll change when he grasps her shoulder and holds her for always. She sits at home, licking each fingertip, trying to recall the taste of him. He is trying to find a way into the maze of her. Look at the corners of him. He is all chiaroscuro in the moon of her face, lit by shadows and cigarette smoke. That had to come in somewhere. And she is glistening in the sheen of his black eyes. The light is soft like hidden places where fish shoal together. They bathe in each other. It is all glow and afterglow. He makes a hook of the smallest finger of his left hand and dips it into the sea. Neither of them know what species of dream he'll catch. So that's an early Tam Lin poem, and that's from the first section of Miss Moon's class, which is divided into 3 sections: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Not in that order in this collection. Then writing comes first, followed by arithmetic, and finishing up with reading. For in poetry, perhaps we start by expressing ourselves, then measure and count how we write, and then we read other people's work in order to develop our own. So the idea of the collection is that it progresses through different phases of learning. I revisited Tam Lin's as a theme more recently, and this is a very different poem. Acento is what I like to call a patchwork poem. It's actually made up from lines taken from other people's poetry and stitched together, if you like, to form a new poem. And so it's tricky, but it's also a wonderful way to celebrate other people's writing and to form it into something new. So I'm going to read Tam Lin Acento. And this includes poetry from Ted Hughes, Sharon Olds, Salima Hill, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Rumi, and many others. Tam Lin. Slowly, detail leafed from the darkness. Then the sun, orange, red, erupted as if it were a star I touched, and a miracle I really wrote. I felt a little like someone small in a raftered church or in a cathedral, the vaulted spaces of the body like a sacred woods made of nothing but grains of polished sand training themselves to become perfect spheres. The hidden sound of things approaching reaches them, and they listen reverently, while in the street outside the people hear nothing whatsoever. One of them said, "I wonder when my turn is." "Soon," I said. "Be patient. Your time is coming." It's not that they're wild, but their will is the same as desire. As usual, I was thinking about the moments of the past, letting my memory rush over them like water. With beating heart and streaming eyes, even now, I swear, since seeing your face, the whole world is a fraud and a fantasy. The garden is bewildered as to what is leaf or blossom. This is how easily the pit opens. This is how one foot sinks into the ground. I thought, why not step into that space? Now you feel how nothing clings to you. Your face is the bright lure I look for, love's hook piercing me. You make the moon red and make us sobbing in the captive poplars, but you come too late. I've rolled up the night of my story on the shelf. In this world, I am the surest thing. I am kept here in this garden, this rose and I the same. It's like this. Here comes the full thrill of my art. Every night, ask until you can hear what replies. Who would have guessed it possible that waiting is sustainable? I've been thinking about the patience of ordinary things, the dreamy ramparts of escalators ascending and descending, 5 sooty dragons near some mossy rocks, the blue bottles who nag heaven with their unimportance. But what are they expected to do? Morning sepia, like medieval photographs, has to fight its way through every scattered grain. Each has its given power, each has its heart, its secret. Love is a war of lightning, and 2 bodies ruined by a single sweetness. You are the beautiful hearth of a golden hurt. two in touch. That's the craft we nurture in folding doubled flesh on frame. How you stand, like a building for a time condemned, then deemed historic. Yes, you will be saved. Whatever they call those particular birds, this is how to make songs, create men, paint pictures, tell a story. And the best thing about the legend is, I can enter it anywhere. So that's where Tamlin is today. And what I'm doing at the moment with my writing is I'm building on the journey that began in Miss Moon's class. I'm building on the journey from childhood to womanhood with myth and learning. And I'm working on a new collection, which is going to be called Girls' Adventures of Long Ago. It's based on Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, except from a female perspective. It takes in a lot of 1970s television shows that I grew up with that have also been a big influence on me and on my writing and on the way I see the world. It will also feature poetry from Cornwall and Hong Kong, as Miss Moon's class does, but there'll be a little more formed poetry. It's always interesting to look back at your first poetry collection. And when I got it out ready for talking with Phil on RTHK this week, it left me feeling a little rueful and a little hopeful, which I think is perhaps how it should be. I'm glad I feel that my writing has progressed. I should hope so. It's 7 years old now, this book, so hopefully it has progressed and evolved. But I was also surprised at how much still holds true. I'll be appearing, my work will be appearing in a new anthology of poetry inspired by Don Quixote. It'll be published by Cornelian Press in July. And it amused me to find that I'd actually included a Don Quixote quote in Miss Moon's class. The arithmetic section begins with one of my favourite quotes from that book: "Patience and shuffle the cards." Patience also crops up in the Tamlin Centre. I imagine it crops up in a lot of my writing. If you're writing about a mythical other, a longed-for other, then patience inevitably will be a theme. But the patience pays off in the end. Before I did my degree in literature, I had a brief flirtation with ancient history and Egyptology and hieroglyphics, which didn't end especially well, but it did. But what I learned from that, I think, was that I was very interested in Egyptology as an amateur, and very much not interested in it as a professional. But there's another beautiful text is the Papyrus of Ani, which is also known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and that's full of Egyptian prayer hymns that occur on the inside of pyramids and in the tombs of pharaohs. And so some of my work in Miss Moon's class also, there's a poem called The Opening of the Mouth, which also uses phrases taken from the Papyrus of Ani. In the beginning, then, I was very much an inspiration-fueled writer, and I would often not have a clear idea in my head in the beginning where a poem was going to go. I would simply write it down, and I would perhaps edit as I was typing it up, and then I'd find it very hard to change it, because even if it was an imperfect poem, which of course they always are, then I'd find it very hard to change. As I think, as you write, when you've been writing for years, then the balance shifts between inspiration and discipline. And I think it's not that inspiration is no longer important, it's just that inspiration will only carry you so far. And in order to improve as a poet, then you need to hone your craft. You definitely need to edit and go back and look over it. And sometimes it may well be that only one line in a poem will actually work in that poem. It might need to be taken out and something entirely new done with it. And when writing, when playing with centos, then this is especially the case, because you're looking at other people's work and saying, okay, not only which line do I love the best, but how does it fit in with others? And one thing I think that working with form really does is give you an understanding of how words can work for you. And it means that, in a funny way, working with form means that you can discover things that you didn't know you were going to write about. Poems can take forms that you didn't realise they were going to, because rather than being stuck in your own ideas, you're looking to see how things fit together. I like the idea of quite a mathematical approach to my poetry these days. I might have, for things like sestinas, even for things like sonnets, I often have a grid and put words in certain places, and then with those juxtapositions other words come up, and things that I wouldn't have thought of. So it's certainly turned around as I've been writing for a longer time. I think it's a combination of things. I think Hong Kong is a constantly changing city. New people are arriving all the time, from different backgrounds, different nationalities, and they're eager to communicate. I think people in Hong Kong are very eager to communicate and to share ideas, especially in the expat community, because you are far from home, and so you're desperately looking for points of commonality. And in order to do that, then you need to open yourself up a little. I think there are very good communities in place that support the exchange of poetry, but I think in general then there's a drive for self-expression. I think Hong Kong's a very vibrant city, always has been in my experience, and so there's actually there's a good space for it, and I think that if a space is created, then people will step into that. Yes.
And the expats, well, not all be Caucasian.
Oh no, absolutely not, and not always monolingual either, and certainly not always just English. I know it possibly hasn't happened so much recently, but wonderful Dave McCurdy at Out Loud organised many events where we'd have different tongues, I think it was called, where we'd have poetry readings with all kinds of different languages. And I think that's one of the beauties of poetry, in fact, is that you can still be open to the music of poetry, even if you don't know the meaning, even if it's in a different language. You can listen to poetry that's read in Arabic or Spanish or German, and, well, if the reader's a good one, of course, I mean, that will always make a difference. But if the poet's doing what they should be, then you can be absolutely enthralled by a poem, even if you have no idea what it might mean. It can even be an interesting writing exercise, I think, to do imaginary translations, to listen to poetry in another language and write down what you think it means based on how it was performed. That can be a very interesting exercise. Well, I've always been interested in writing, but specifically poetry, I don't know. No, perhaps not.
Are you referring to the poem that she wrote when she was 5 or 6?
No, I think so much. When you read any form of writing, novels, poetry, you usually see several pages of dedications and acknowledgements and thanks. And I think that successful writers are usually surrounded by supportive, inspiring, and challenging writing communities. And it's certainly not necessary. You can do it on your own, but it certainly makes it easier if you are surrounded by people who will challenge your practice and encourage you and welcome you and hear you. I think that makes a huge difference. Yes. So definitely, well, I can say that I really wasn't interested in poetry until I started actually doing poetry. I didn't think that was the way my writing would go at all. I think I had visions of, as many undergraduates do, and then learn better later, have visions of being some kind of post-Joycean experimental prose writer before hopefully seeing the error of their ways pretty fast. Hi Rosie, nice to see you. So yes, I think my flatmates had a big influence on me, and there was a slight element of competition as well. I think healthy competition also helps to spur you on to good things. So that certainly made a difference too.
Have you ever thought about writing a novel again?
I have thought about it, and what I have thought for the most part is that it's too long for me, and it's not where my talents lie at this stage. I have a great deal of respect for people who write novels. It's a tremendously difficult thing to do, but I've also found in my editing work that I find it much easier these days to edit poetry than prose, because I have a very micro lens. And so what tends to happen when I'm proofreading and copy editing prose is that I will be doing that as if it were a poem, which is fine if you've got 20 lines of prose, but if you've got 200 pages, then it soon becomes unworkable. And so I suspect that the same is true for me and for novels. I think the small moment is where my skills lie.
My very personal impression.
Yes.
I feel that you're a modern 21st century person, but I think your education is in UK, right?
That's right. Yes.
Very, very good quality orthodox education. So it gives me this impression. You're neither the modern poem writer, nor are you the sonnet, Shakespeare, those
Sure,
people.
yes.
But it seems like you're kind of in the middle to me. I say this totally with appreciation.
Well, thank
But
you.
it's a very personal impact on me.
No.
Like you told us that sometimes you want to keep the form and you want to fit certain things in
Yes.
it. So it's that bit that gives me this impression. Yeah.
No, I think that's a very accurate view, and thank you for making that point. I do feel that very much so. I also think that that's necessary for evolution of your writing, and perhaps just of your growth in general. I think as an English woman who has made her home in Hong Kong, then I'm always going to have my feet
On the ground.
my feet on the ground, but on in different places,
Yes.
In different places, and so there's always going to be a sense of, well, depending on whether you're feeling optimistic or pessimistic, either bridging the gaps or falling between them. Hopefully bridging those gaps for the most part. So no, thank you. I think
on
that's...
the one hand, I can see those people who are really creative. They write in their own way.
Yes.
And of course, some people will definitely understand and appreciate. Some might not, but we still see that this kind of writers. On the other hand, we have more traditional writing back in history. People are evolving and so on. But to me, I seem to find quite a lot of people, like Celia, also struck me that a lot of the people, they are creative, they have their thinking and their ideas, but somehow it looks like there's a need to have some kind of form, tidiness, things like that.
Well, I think in the beginning, I definitely felt that rhymed poetry was a restriction, that I wanted to be free, I wanted to explore, I didn't want to have that constraint in any way. But it's, the more I experiment with form, and I don't always write form poetry now, as you say, then, you know, there's a marriage of the two, I guess. But it's like Wordsworth says, you know, nuns fret not at their convent's narrow cell. I find that actually including structure can be tremendously liberating, which sounds like a contradiction, but it allows me to explore things that I didn't realise I was going to explore, and that can be tremendously reassuring. And it also, it's a way of exercising your poetic muscles. I think it strengthens you as a poet. I think it allows you to explore new ideas, and it allows you to play with language. It's a great deal of fun. But like everything, I mean, you know, when you first play a musical instrument or kick a ball, and you're so excited at just being able to do it, that in itself is satisfying. But the longer you do it, you know, if you're still just scraping away at Greensleeves when you've been playing the violin for 10 years, then it's no longer going to be as satisfying.
Or married.
Yes. Well, exactly. Yes. There'll be no Greensleeves at this stage. So I think it's. I don't know if it's inevitable, but it's certainly been a necessary part of growth for my poetry, and I haven't felt hemmed in by it. Quite the contrary. I've felt that it's allowed me to grow in ways that I would not have imagined possible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.